I'm seeing North Carolina actually into the chat. We have Wichita, Kansas, that's represented here today. Of course, we have South Carolina, which is where we're based, in Greenville specifically. Many of you are aware, though, that we are a 100% remote work organization, so our colleagues are all over. That's not because of the pandemic, but rather because that's been our business model since inception. Marcel, welcome, Jacksonville, Florida. Glad to have you here. Long Beach, California is also represented, as well as Montgomery, Alabama. Hi, Tiffany. I am seeing Sunnyside, Washington in the house as well, and Tampa, Florida, Phoenix. Okay, so the list goes on and on. We're so grateful to have each of you here. I want you to be aware that at NWC, we really do believe in disability inclusion. So we do have closed caption that has been made available for any of you that may find that of benefit. So we often like to socialize that with our community. And we also want you to know that while cameras are certainly welcomed and encouraged, we know that some of you are just joining in an auditory capacity, and that is absolutely fine. We are thrilled to have you nonetheless in whatever capacity in which you are participating in today's Intentional Conversation VodCast. I want to shout out the NWC team who always divide and conquer around helping to ensure this virtual learning experience is one that is worthwhile and one that is seen as valuable. And so we really do appreciate when folks join us. And so thank you so much again. Sit back and I hope you enjoy the show. This is Intentional Conversations VodCast. Welcome. Let the conversation begin, and that's exactly what we're about to do right now. We have been expecting you all, and I'm so glad to have you here. If you're just joining us, I'm Dr. Nika White. My pronouns, she, her, hers, and I am your host of Intentional Conversations VodCast and the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. I also want to do a special shout out to those who are joining us via LinkedIn Live. We know that some may like to get the content from this VodCast in that capacity. We do often encourage you, though, to register for the Zoom and join us in that regard. We think that the experience is optimized. And so if you're joining us right now on LinkedIn Live and you want to pop over to Zoom, my team is going to place into the comment section the link for you to do so. Otherwise, feel free to hang out there. We're going to be watching the chat and the comments to make sure that we bring that information into our VodCast community for those that are joined here as part of the Zoom community. I am really thrilled today, and I know we're going to have a riveting conversation. So let's jump right in. And tomorrow, August 26th, is a really important day, and I hope that you all are aware that we're going to be celebrating Women's Equality Day. This is really important, and at NWC, we certainly recognize the importance of Women's Equality Day. Celebrating and raising awareness around Women's Equality Day is critical. How many of you are aware that over 90% of the world's female population live in countries with a prominent women's empowerment deficit and a significant gender gap? Over 90%. Those are real facts here that we're talking about. So Women's Equality Day was created to honor women's suffrage in the US. In 1973, Congress passed the Women's Equality Day just to remind us all of how far we've come and also to raise awareness about how much more work we need to do still. At NWC, we value challenging gender stereotypes, calling out discrimination, drawing attention to bias, and seeking inclusion wherever we can. So collective activism is what drives change, and we invite you to make sure that you're doing your part in this very important work as well. August is also National Black Business Month. I've been talking about this all month long, and as a Black woman founder, I will continue to, beyond August, to talk about the importance of supporting Black businesses. I just recently wrote an article that I shared on LinkedIn. I will ask my team to source that and place it into the chat, but it provides lots of strategies and simple, practical ways in which each of us, whether you are a leader in an organization or just an individual consumer, can support Black businesses all year long. And so I hope that you will take heed to some of those suggestions. I continue to amplify that. LinkedIn Learning course number 1 is available. It has been available since the end of June. I checked the stats yesterday, and we have over 6,000 learners that have taken that course so far. And so we're only talking about a short period of time, and I know that community is going to grow. I hope that you are part of that community. That topic of the course is individual accountability for equity and inclusion. I encourage you to check it out. My team will place a link into the chat so that you can make sure that you have that saved. And if you think that it's of value, you will take the course and then also share it with others. And I'm working on 2 more courses to release actually in 2024. And so this is exciting time. If you've been hanging with us, you know that I continue to also promote my book number 3, Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI, which was published by Forbes Books. It's available on Amazon, on audiobook. And by the way, it is my voice and the audiobook. And I take a lot of pride in that because I hear from a lot of people that it lands on you differently when you're reading the book in the author's voice or hearing the book read in the author's voice. And so I hope that you will take advantage of those opportunities. One of my favorite parts of the book is each chapter has its own infographic or summaries of the most salient points from each chapter. And so I've tried to make it a very practical tool for you. If you don't have your copy, please run and get it. And if you do have your copy, I would really appreciate if you would consider writing an Amazon review for me. Thank you so much. If you've enjoyed our Intentional Conversations VodCast and you also like to get your content maybe in a podcast capacity, then you can do so. We've had this available on the go now across many different podcast platforms. And so if you know someone that just likes to be able to, while they're riding in their car, listen to some good content, then you can certainly recommend the Intentional Conversations podcast to them. Thank you so much for continuing to grow our community. I also like to let you know that at NWC, we have a lot of courtesy resources that just helps people to deepen their knowledge and their understanding around just the broad topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. We do this through short 2 to 3 minute videos that we release weekly called Inclusion Uncomplicated. And so we do have a whole playlist where we've archived them. And again, each week, new content is being released. And so want to make sure that I have you, that you have that in your hearing and you are paying attention to some of those other resources we are making available at NWC. Once again, my team will drop a link into the chat, into the comments if you're on LinkedIn, so that you can have access to our 100+ videos that have already released. Now, one of the things that we like to do before we provide a formal introduction of our guest co-host for the day is to give you a little bit of information for what you can look forward to in weeks ahead concerning our guest co-host. And so in September, we're going to be kicking it off with Daniel Sims. Daniel Sims, his conversation is going to be all about DEI modeling and its role in developing effective trainings, assessing trainer performance, and how can we use design thinking strategies to maintain lasting systemic change. This is an important conversation because I don't know about you all, but I have seen a lot of criticism around DEI training. Not all DEI training is created equal. And so I really want to kind of get granular with Daniel and talk about what are those things that organizations should be looking for as they evaluate training, or as we like to say at NWC, learning experiences. We don't like the word training for those in their organization. So join us on September 1st for that conversation. Then that next Friday on the 8th, we're going to be welcoming Nika, and we're going to be talking about how a physician workforce that reflects its patient population can be associated with improved outcomes, compliance, cultural humility, and can lead to decreased disparities in the promotion of health equity, a really important topic. So I hope you will join us on that week. And then September 15th, we have Dawn Christian that's going to be joining. And Dawn is going to be talking about her proprietary framework, ethos-driven leadership, and the connection between leadership, wellness, and belonging. And so Dawn is a friend. I can't wait to welcome her. And I hope that you all will meet us here for that important conversation. If you also have someone that you know would make a great co-host for the Intentional Conversations VodCast, let us know. Let us know. We'd love to be in touch with them. And we're now booking for 2024. So the rest of this year, we're all booked up. Okay. It does me great pleasure now to formally introduce this week's guest co-host, Rhonda Midgette. Rhonda Midgette, she's people obsessed, a workplace enthusiast, equity warrior, 25 years of HR leadership, development, DEI, talent acquisition, coaching experience. She also has a master's in HR from Villanova University, bachelor's in business administration, Catawba College, and then a certificate in diversity and inclusion from Cornell University. She's also certified John Maxwell leadership coach and trainer, and she's currently serving as an HR manager at Nelson Mullins, an Am Law 100 firm, and previously a VP and HR manager at TD Bank and First Citizens Banks. She is also the proud mom to a technical sergeant, Nathan Stokes of the U.S. Air Force. I love that, Mom. There you go. That's right. Thank you for your service, Mr. Nathan. And if you would join me right now and helping to ensure that Rhonda Midgette feels welcome as our guest co-host for today. I will stop sharing my screen. I will invite you all to find those accolades, those emojis, those words of just validation, but whatever it is, go to the chat, go to the comments, and let's let Rhonda know how much we really appreciate her being here with us. I'm going to add her to the spotlight. And Rhonda, my friend, welcome. Thank you so much for saying yes to our invitation. I am so glad we were able to get you in. And I know today's conversation is going to be really, really rich. I will go ahead and tell you that we've been touching on the topic of the intersection of HR and DEI. And so I know this community is really going to want to go in deep on this, right? So much to say about it. But before we get there, Rhonda, one of the things we always ask our guest co-hosts to do is to share with us, as they're providing a greeting to this audience, something about yourself that we would not know from reading your bio or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. So welcome, my friend.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I think one of the things that people don't automatically notice or assume about me is that, I grew up on a farm. My first job was feeding the pigs on my stepfather's farm. And he was retired military, and he made it perfectly clear that none of us was mission critical. There were 7 of us in a blended family, so everybody had to pull their weight. So when your first job is as humbling as carrying a bucket of corn to make sure that the hogs get fed so that the family gets fed, you learn very, very quickly how to have a servant mindset. And that's pretty much carried me through my HR career, my DEI career, all the things that we have to do to make sure that the people feel cared for and professionally fed in the organizations that I've worked in. And so I think that's kind of like shaped me, it really has.
I love that. Professionally fed. I love that. Yes. And nothing is more humbling than feeding pigs, and then, taking that spirit of just servanthood to your family, to your community, and bringing it into the workplace. And so that's something we probably all can learn from that. So thanks so much, Rhonda. So we're going to talk about a lot today, but I want to prioritize the top half of our time and really just getting granular about this conversation of the tension points that can exist between the HR function and the DEI function. And I know that we've touched on this a couple different times throughout our weekly programming, and it's a big conversation right now. This audience is very keenly aware of my perspective on this, and so I'll kind of reserve those thoughts for maybe some newcomers that are here today for the first time. But Rhonda, when you reached out, one of the things that you said was, I want to talk about this. I want to break this down. I am an HR professional, and I have some strong opinions about this, and I need to talk about it. And you have this platform today. So I just want you to lead in with just your general thoughts, and then we'll get more specific with asking some maybe pointed questions around this topic.
Okay. All right. Sounds great.
Yeah, so go for it. What are your thoughts about the intersection between HR and DEI?
Well, I've lived both sides of the fence. I've had a 4-year stint where I was the HR person and the DEI person, and it's exhausting. So it's really very, I have to say, a little bit narcissistic to want to amplify the work and the sustainability of the CDO position in organizations, particularly in the one that I'm working in now, which I'm excited to say we do have a great relationship. As a matter of fact, I got a Go team email from, our HR, our DEI person this morning when I was joining the podcast. But I have a job. We have our compliance, we have payroll, we have all those things that, again, professionally feed the people in the organization at all levels. And so sometimes we can get into that mode, but don't have the full-on DEI lens that we need. So it's very much of a service to us and to the organization to have a dedicated resource just to provide that lens on the many things that we have to do on a daily basis. And even in the strategies and the people strategy that we're helping the leaders to determine for the now, for the 2 years out. I would say 3 to 5 years, but COVID cut all of that 3 to 5 year strategy out. You have to solve for now. You had to jump into the what's going on now. And then there's a certain, support mechanism that we have to put in place when someone's new to the organization, because a lot of our diversity folks have not been grown in the business that they are charged to manage diversity for, right? So, for instance, the first diversity person that I really professional that I ever encountered was Natalie Taylor from Food Line many, many years ago. And she is prolific in all of the work that she did for that organization in North Carolina, Virginia, and in sometimes South Carolina, just representing the company and keeping them communicating with the communities of color. Natalie was born in that organization. She started out as a cashier in a Food Line store. And so she was able to grow that role with a tremendous amount of business acumen from the front line to the C-suite. And that's what made her so strong.
Yeah.
What we found, or what we are finding, is that because there are people now, we have diversity as an educational path. People can get full-on degrees in it. Sometimes they're coming into organizations without that full-on business acumen, knowing how the business makes its money, knowing who its competitors are, knowing who the stakeholders are, knowing how to communicate to those entrenched powers in the C-suite that you have to go in a certain way even to be heard, a certain time of year. If a CDO is hired after the budget season and everything is already allocated, how does she get money for resources to hire other people, to bring in the consultants that she needs? That's where those of us who have been around that business for a minute can help shore that person up, and they're not hanging out there in the balance on their own with those, conversations that need to be had. And we can leverage our relationships that we already have. So it can be very symbiotic. It can be beautiful. But if it doesn't go well, if we don't show up and support them, and we look up and all of a sudden, like with the Disney CDO that recently left, right?
Yeah.
The public statement was, she's moving on and her team is being split up into two other areas, the talent acquisition team and the communications team. And, I'm not going to be a preacher here, but the scriptures do tell us that for lack of leadership, the people do perish. And so my heart went out to the team that's now split up into two other areas that are fully functioning, well on their way on completely different paths. So hopefully they will find someone in that role to pull them back together before they lose that talent too. So that's my soapbox, Nika. I hope that.
Yeah. I wouldn't call it a soapbox at all. I appreciate you bringing your perspective to the conversation. And by the way, we love a lively chat. And so as Rhonda and I are discussing topics for today, if something resonates with you or there's a resource that comes to mind that you think this community would gain value from, please take to the chat. Let us know. Let's make sure we're being proximate to each other and using that as an extension of this community. And so I just want to comment on a couple of things that you shared. The first is you mentioned that HR, and you used the word compliance. And so when most people think about HR, they do think about compliance. They do think about the protection of the organization. And so, and that is a very important role and hat for those professionals to wear. When you think about the role of DEI, it is much more akin to protection of the people, trying to create those opportunities where they currently don't exist, trying to bring perspectives to the tables when decisions are being made that can impact people in ways that maybe those decision makers don't even realize. And so that is where I have found a lot of the tension points to come in when we talk about should DEI kind of fall under HR or whether or not it needs to be its own entity. And so I plant that seed, and I'm certainly going to want you to react to that. But just to follow along with some of the other points you brought up before as well, you mentioned the educational path. You're so right. This whole DEI work this discipline of DEI, it is still relatively new. HR has been around for a long time. And even when you think about the curriculum, all of the ways in which those individuals are certified to be professionals in that space, it wasn't until recently that it became a necessity that, oh yes, now we need to very intentionally incorporate some of this learning around the discipline of DEIB into the work and the experience and the training and the upskilling of those professionals. And so for those who have been at this work for a long time and they aren't aligning themselves with opportunities to grow that level of competency from a DEI lens, then would you say that they're at a disadvantage? And so I've tossed two questions out at you, Rhonda. I want to give you a chance to respond. But again, the first was about the compliance, HR being more, for protection of the organization, DEI more protection for the people. And then, that gap in the education that has not always existed within the HR world.
So first of all, about HR being more compliance driven and so forth. And I think that that's more of a historical view of us, because we now understand, with the whole, affirmative action going away. And just think even back as far as the Lilly Ledbetter Act, how she existed for many, many years in an organization where there was HR, right? And it's a very public case where, someone should have caught the fact that she was making 40% less than her male counterparts for many, many years. So the compliance pieces were there, and it was a law that says she should have made, equal pay. But I'd like to think if there was more of a higher level person for, in the diversity role, it would have had two mechanisms to support making that change before it had to be a Supreme Court decision and then a Barack Obama, act signed to get the lady her money. And it was post-retirement. Then she fought that situation from 1998 to 2009. That's a long time to try to get paid. Long time. So again, whereas we have the compliance and we have the laws, and this is where we live, we're evolving to where we see the value more so of not just, if it's not a law, we don't have to worry about it. If it's not a legislation, we don't have to worry about it. There's some softer things, there's some grayer areas that we also have to make cases for to support people. And, it's not just talent acquisition, it's in our benefits offering, basically, healthcare, dental, vision, or whatever. But the mental health piece is taken off, and we are partnering with our DEI people to make sure that we have specific, mental health offerings by people of color who are practitioners, so that our employees of color can get the help that they need by people who can identify with their significant needs. So just stretching it out, and sharing the load, because we full have day jobs in HR, but having someone, and I think it's important that depending on the culture of your organization and the size of your organization, if you can separate it out and let that person focus on that piece of it, it's the ideal situation, right? If you've got 20 employees, you barely have enough resource for an HR person. But if you've got 200, 2,000 employees, having a dedicated resource at a high level that isn't necessarily reporting up under HR all the time, a dotted line is fine, but having someone who has that seat at the table that you can support it's really eye-opening when you're talking about making really transformative change and change that you can sustain for a long period. Now, the other question was about education and we all need that. That's why I went back and, I don't know that I'll ever want to not have my fingers in HR, but when I went back and got my certification at Cornell, and when I walked through the Raleigh Institute here in South Carolina, which I think may be where you and I met years ago, it really broadened my perspective, and it made me have the ability to offer more in the points of my career where the company was not at the point where they were going to dedicate a full-on resource to diversity. So standing in the gap, if you're an HR person, and getting that training to understand it, then you're better able to make the case for, hey, I've taken it this far. we really need someone who can just have a full on, 8 hours a day to dedicate to this, so that I can see what I might be missing trying to juggle both things.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up some really good points, Rhonda. So I appreciate you sharing your insight. And one of the points that resonated with me is, yes, obviously the size of an organization, how many employees can dictate whether or not the organization is poised and positioned to be able to have a chief diversity officer and also a chief, HR officer, right? And so I definitely think that in the instances where it's not feasible to have someone that is solely dedicated to the DEI work, then it is natural for organizations to place that work under HR, especially this day and time where, while it has not always been this way, there is great recognition this day and time that the lens of DEI has to be fully embedded into the HR function and the HR work. And so I wanted just to amplify that point. Some could criticize that this has been reactionary instead of, seeing the work of HR as automatically not just being from a compliance perspective, but also really leaning into the needs of the differences of the workforce and helping to advocate for that. But it is what it is, right? Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And as this work has evolved and as it has increased in popularity and in need, we've become smarter. And so I don't want this audience to miss that there is an appreciation that I have for those who are HR professionals like yourself, who are advocating for, we need to deepen our knowledge base, so that we can help support the functions of DEI.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. This is not, DEI work is not just about the human capital aspect. That's huge. That's a big asset, the biggest asset of all organizations. But it's also about so many other functions of operations as well. And I think that's also a point that is missed by maybe a lot of folks who just automatically make the decision to place DEI under HR. I think about, what about the procurement process and the purchasing process? Is there a lens of DEI and equity in that? What about your communications? How in which you're reaching different audiences? Is there a lens of DEI in that? So I want to pause here for a second and just give you a chance to kind of respond or react to how this work of DEI infiltrates the entire organization and how HR seems to be much more singularly focused on the human capital aspect.
So we have to make sure that we have the talent. So we've had to shift, I would say, the last 10 or 15 years to making sure that we have deep business acumen, how your business works, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so we touch everything, it's particularly, like I said, from talent acquisition to retaining somebody to making sure that we're competitively paying, that sort of thing. But for our DEI folks, there is a supplier diversity. There is a looking at our market share. Where do we need to go, right? How do we need to engage in community things? Like since Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and all those situations, I have lost count of the big $1 million, $100,000 donations that have been made. And you just have to wonder that when the smoke clears with all of that, are we really utilizing the talents of our DEI people to change the course of the business from a very fundamental level? I mean, we have laws and rules that we live by in HR, but you can only legislate so much. You cannot legislate the heart and the religious impact that people bring to the table. So we have to allow that DEI lens on every aspect of the business in order to move the business itself forward. Branding, looking at how our commercials are. I remember the backlash for the Cheerios commercial when they had a mixed cup on it. It was Cheerios, it was just, that's all there was to it. So, we have to be able to sit down, all of us together, the business entities, the people entities, and see DEI as a pure strategy, energy, just, opinions, processes, all of that, to make sure that everybody has the input that we need to have. before we take on any major business initiative. It's just that important going forward. It has been for a while. I think those situations that I named earlier called it out, but we really have to make sure that we hold on to it, because once you let a really strong CDO go, or you disband the department, or you roll it back to where it was before, people see that internally. And no matter how you donate it to this cause or that cause or whatever, you're not going to retain the talent that you need if you don't, change things inside.
Yeah. So, Rhonda, can you talk a little bit about some of the new trends that have of recent years come into play as it relates to considerations that HR professionals must also have and consider under their purview? So, like, for example, I'm seeing in the chat, there was a reference earlier to like mental health and well-being. That was not necessarily something that a lot of HR professionals would have develop certain initiatives or programming around. And so can you give other examples of some of those new and evolved trends that are now finding its way as really important consideration sets, just from an HR, DEI, leadership perspective?
I think taking on more of an active role, particularly when we have like smaller DEI groups, and collaborating on the training and the development of it, right? I was telling a colleague a few weeks ago, I'm just over the whole implicit, unintentional, unconscious, whatever you call it, bias training that seems to be a little remote now. I think that there's a point that comes in every organization where you have to really hold people accountable. Because first time, maybe it was unconscious or implicit. Second and third time, you were wide awake, you knew what you were doing, you knew what you were saying. So, making sure that when we review our policies, that we have things in place that say we are going to act on misbehavior, on bad actors, and really calling it out more than we have before, and being a stronger voice for that. Where we want to make sure that we don't have like targeted hiring, because that goes against everything. But how do we cast a wider net? Are we getting out there more? Are we putting our jobs in places where people have access to them, and listening more to employees from a lens of not just, well, we didn't break any rules, so there's nothing we could do about it, but really hearing what they're saying and how the workplace is impacting them, the environment, everything from whether or not they have access to, the sunlight in the workplace. So, how they're getting along with each other. So we're taking more of a approach where we're looking at the environment and how it impacts people's emotional well-being, whether or not the work is meaningful. We've got AI hitting us now, and that's such a big thing. That, in HR, we're people, and we like to think that we're intuitive, and we think through, and we all that feelings and so forth. And we've got to watch the AI like a hawk. I'm going to a conference in a month or so just to get a deeper dive in it, because we cannot allow it to take the people element out of it. Recruiting or performance management, we'll use it to make those things better, but we can't just rest on AI, because, the EEOC just, won a case recently where someone, was it called robot bias, where someone was proved age discrimination by AI. And that judgment of $365,000 fell on the company, not on the AI. So I think if we're talking about things that, are futuristic, how we manage that, how we utilize that, how we make sure it doesn't get in the way of the strategies that we have to be more diverse and inclusive, is a big thing for us right now.
Yeah, there's still a lot more to uncover as it relates to AI and how it intersects with DEI and the practices to really maintain what DEI is designed to do. And so I certainly appreciate you bringing that to the conversation. So Ann White, who's part of our community today, thanks Ann for being here. She placed a comment into the chat that HR has a key role in culture. And I absolutely believe that. And so when I think about what makes a culture healthy, it is one where people feel like they can be authentic, they can show up as their best selves, that they have full opportunity for success, right? So that equity piece is definitely ever present. So my question for you, Rhonda, is what are some coaching mechanisms or strategies that you may share with HR professionals to help them drive more proactively towards advocacy of principles that support the work of equity? And I'll give you an example. HR professionals are often the ones who are overseeing the talent acquisition. You referenced that a moment ago. That's a big piece of it, of course. And we know that pay equity is something that's really critical for a lot of people. They're asking those questions. They want transparency. So while an HR professional could potentially have the position that, yes, this transparency is necessary. Yes, we do want to make sure we're being forthcoming. Sometimes there could be tension points because maybe while that HR professional is an advocate of something of that nature, maybe the C-suite other leaders are not very much in favor of just being transparent about salaries, right? And they're like, if someone's willing to come in and take this job for X, then why would we be proactive and mention that, they're kind of underselling themselves? How do you like to navigate some of those challenges, and how do you coach other HR professionals to work through those tension points? Tough question, I know.
It's actually a very good question. And I have to say that that's one area where we stand pretty strong on, is what we used to call lowballing. And I had a coach of my own years ago, and when I was a recruiter, to say, if you throw out peanuts, you get circus acts or you get monkeys. And so, you have to be competitive with pay. I mean, every company has its own little, not little, but their strategy. Either you want to lead with pay, and then, there are other things about the job that might not be as wonderful, or you kind of go in the middle and provide opportunities for growth and so forth. So when you're looking at the total package, it's really not, it's about pay, but it's about other things that you are willing to offer that person. And when you get into those negotiations and those conversations, you just don't want to start out completely, with the lowest. You go mid, and then you go back and forth with it. Of course, in every organization, there are the positions where you're going to go premium, right? Because those are your bread and butter. If you're going after someone who's already entrenched and experienced in their field, if they're a banker and they've been with another bank for a long period of time and they're successful and they're bringing a big book of business, and they're going to be, someone that you're going to negotiate a little higher for. But with every position, you want to go big or stay home these days, because particularly with your Zers and your Xers, those people are just, they want to know up front. And you've got several states that make you put the
Absolutely.
salary. And so why just do it for everybody? Don't wait for a state to mandate it. Be frank, be open about what you can offer and what you offer in addition to pay, and be as competitive as you can.
Yeah, the total rewards package. Thank you for that. So momentarily, I am going to shift to your audience and allow you to share questions, comments, to contribute to the conversation in whatever way that feels appropriate. And so as you percolate on maybe those curiosities that are bubbling up for you, make note of them. If you're part of the Zoom community, you can let me know that you would like to present your question by using the raise hand feature, and I will call on you. I'll add you to the spotlight and allow you to unmute yourself to share. If you want to just go to the chat and place your question there, we will make sure within the time that we have that we'll do our best to try to get to your question. And I already see a question that's coming from our LinkedIn Live audience group. And so we'll get to that momentarily. So here is what I want to ask you about next while folks are thinking about perhaps their questions for you, Rhonda. So how can we help ensure that the teams holding the work of implementing DEI initiatives, ERG leaders, BRG leaders, DEI council committee members, that they are not overlooked? And I think that HR has some influence and role over that, especially in the absence of maybe like a DEI dedicated professional in that organization. But what are some practices to help ensure that those individuals doing this hard work or not overlooked?
Well, you got to measure. You got to have measures that matter. Sometimes we tend to have, charts here and there and projections and so forth, but you've got to determine a good 3 to 5 measures that impact the business, if it's retention, if it is market share, whatever is on that C-suite's business agenda, DEI has to be right in line with it. Now that creates a necessity for transparency from the C-suite, right? They have to tell you what they're after, what they're going for in the next year or so, and then apply those same measures and regularly check in. Like if you have resource groups and they are for LGBTQ plus or what have you, are we doing the things internally to retain and support? And that's very easily measured by how many people you actually retain. Or if you do an engagement survey with your employees, what are they saying that their needs are? And don't do a survey if you're not going to pay attention to what people ask for in the survey. So if they're asking for more engagement opportunities, if they're asking for more events internally, if they're asking for more advancement opportunities or to be mentored, mentoring is huge in organizations where, you have, because the whole point of diversity is that you identify those areas where there are smaller amounts of people than in the mainstream of the organization. So holding on to those people and having those measures in place that say, we've reached out, we've done this because it was asked for, and constantly showing and telling. It's huge to show and tell once you know what it is that they're looking for. And making sure that at the end of the day, you've got to pay equally. You've got to give the equal access to learning and development and training. And if your learning and development team is strong enough to where you can offer different ways to learn, not just from just your basic access online or whatever, but if someone learns differently and they need a one-on-one as opposed to a group setting, dive in deeper to make sure that when you have certifications offered and you have opportunities offered for people to get the information that they need, to get the training that they need to grow in the organization, that you don't always have to go outside to buy talent. You can develop from within. And that's probably the biggest thing that a lot of organizations should be focusing on now, is where are those areas and where are those talents and where are those skills that we're going to need in the next couple of years? What's our succession planning looking like? And if our succession plan hasn't changed in the last 5 to 10 years, there needs to be a huge conversation with whoever is responsible for DEI there. Because if people don't see themselves in the future of your organization, if you're not tapping into them and reaching out, then that's going to hit your retention goals. And somebody's got to answer for that, right? So those are some things I think that we need to really focus on is that growing from within and reaching out to those diverse populations and saying, hey, do we need to help you grow in a different way? Do we need to sidestep maybe the norm and meet you where you are,
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to see greater intentionality for the individuals within these organizations that are taking on the additional work. And I say additional work because most often it's without pay, it's without any type of recognition. Mm-hmm. And what I'm speaking of is like leading ERGs and BRGs and supporting very specific other DEI initiatives that are layered on top of their primary responsibilities, if you will. So as you talk about succession planning and really helping people to be groomed for greater opportunities in the organization, my hope is that there's going to be some additional intentionality around organizations looking at those leaders, especially in situations where maybe they aren't yet at a place to where they're committed to, or even as feasible to be able to compensate them on top of whatever kind of, compensation package they currently have.
There are other ways to reward and recognize, having a specific DEI award at the end of the year for people who have taken that on, because it is a lot, but
Yeah.
also understanding that these people are showing leadership capabilities in the way that's afforded to them. So they may not have a VP title, they may not have, a high level position, but this is a way to recognize and acknowledge that people from any chair, from all walks of the company org chart can show, hey, I can contribute, I can lead, I can grow, I can manage a project, if you would, that contributes to the bottom line of the company by helping to retain and support diverse talent. And
Yeah.
so step up like that, you really do need to, even if it's a bonus at the end of the year for
Mhm.
the work, and
Yeah.
definitely acknowledge it on their reviews. Don't let it go unrecognized.
Yes. Yes.
They
Yes.
don't encourage more people to do the work.
Yeah, great points. And so if organizations have reached a pretty firm decision that the present time is not feasible for them to actually, provide some type of extra compensation, then I love the idea of a secondary option, thinking about other ways to make sure that they are valued while they're doing the work, whether it is through a bonus or a stipend, or, building it into their performance review process and their recognition, and the opportunities for upward mobility, because they are taking on those additional projects is really important. So here's a question, Rhonda, that comes from our LinkedIn community. Does DEI confront the issues of nepotism in the workplace?
It should. And again, this is a culture question for sure.
Yeah.
If it's a mom and pop company and it's, Joe Brown's, shoe shop or whatever, and it's just grown into this entity, then, the succession plan is probably going to include Joe Brown Jr. or Joette.
Yeah.
That's just kind of the nature of that culture. However, in larger organizations where we have a lot more scrutiny on those sorts of things, we tend to have policies in place that say, that person can't report to someone that they're related to, that sort of thing. And
Mhm.
we address it as need be. But there's always going to be the caveat that sometimes the sustainability of the businesses in question, and we may have to, look a different way at that policy. But for the most part, DEI, I would say, works with HR within whatever the policy has established for that company. And it's not the hugest focus, I would say, for that group.
Mhm. No, thank you. Thank you for your insights on that. So I'm seeing something in the chat right now that relates to a statement that was made a moment ago about how HR is responsible for culture. It's all about really the culture of the organization. And we have seen a trend of a number of organizations that have reframed the way in which they talk about the HR function. So a lot of times now we're seeing people and culture, things of that nature. And so just what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I love it. I'm here for all of it. I think you informed everyone in the beginning. I've been in this HR space for over 25 years. And I've seen it go from personnel to human resources to, chief. Now everybody's a chief people officer or what have you. And I love the progress, because at the end of the day, I think somehow we did get a little black and white, when it's really a great profession. You have to kind of look at all things considered before you make a decision, before you implement a policy, before you, grow your own HR acumen. And so the whole idea of it being people focused is so that we don't lose why we got into it in the first place. And
Mhm.
that yes, we want to be having that seat at the table, but we're there to represent the people in the organization and to make sure that they are treated fairly, they're paid fairly, they have the same opportunities. And again, when we're having to have that conversation for what we know is necessary for the DEI space, it's nice to have someone else in the trenches. And I would think that for the DEI professionals, it's nice to have the HR person and your two voices instead of one
Yeah.
against all the other bottom
Right.
line this is how we got to make money, and this is a side thing. I say that, as a HR person for many years, not too long ago, we were kind of on those chopping blocks too. Do we have to have all of you people? How many people does it take to run payroll? Well, payroll is just a piece of what we do, So if we have forgotten what that felt like, shame on us. When we watch, our diversity folks get disbanded and go on the chopping block, we should be like, oh, no. We've been here. It's not a good idea. So protecting the culture is a lot of what we do. A lot of behind the scenes. We do get it from both sides. Like sometimes the employees ask for things that we just can't do for them, and we try to explain it as best we can, but we do as much as we can to keep the culture positive and inclusive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So I want to go to this next question, and I'm prefacing this by saying that in this world of DEI, we try to avoid generalizations and stereotypes, but in the context of this HR discussion and people that are leading in that capacity, one particular population of people in that profession is really being criticized these days. And I want to just get your perspective on why do you think that is, and what do you think that group needs to be aware of? And I'm talking about white women HR professionals.
I think that the ones I've worked with, for the most part, have a lot of good intentions at heart. And HR has always kind of been like one of the places that we've been in survival mode for many, many years. So I think that there are possibly some out there who, in the context of being in survival mode, scrapping for resources for HR in a traditional sense for their teams and so forth, may not have put themselves in the best positions or communicated to the diversity issue at hand in a way that makes them look like they are as open-minded or as devoted to that part of the people culture as they are to the more functionary aspects of HR. Which is why, the diversity piece, sometimes if it's under HR, depending on who that person is running HR, doesn't get the attention and the resources that it really, really needs to thrive. And moving it out from that person who's been in survival mode, getting things done, doing the right things, doing the functionary things, is a good idea as soon as the company has the opportunity to do it in some cases.
Yeah.
That's probably about as safe as I can respond.
Thank you for leaning into that. I know that can be a situation.
I think it absolutely depends on that person. Again,
absolutely.
And there are some, non-white, HR people
absolutely
who are not
absolutely
all about, making that stretch. So I think it's just what the organization has allowed and what we need to evolve into doing.
There's some good conversations are happening in our chat. Someone just shared that I always have lots of feelings and reflections when I consider cis white women being in HR roles where they are in charge of regulation and enforcement of policies that directly impact marginalized workers. So many thoughts I'm sure ruminate for so many people. And I don't think that this phenomenon of, calling in the behaviors of Karens is helping, because it's really just kind of highlighting the potential harm that can come, and that, there's evidence that it has come from people not being, fully well aware of the implications of how in which they show up to report and to make claims around, certain people of color and their actions. And so I think it's an important and relevant conversation to this broad topic.
And it's education and training that needs to happen all around on both sides. Like, I think that it's a disservice for DEI people to not dig a little bit deeper past the visual of there may be a white woman or a cisgender person running HR, and understand the weight of that role
Yeah.
and the responsibility of that role and what comes crashing down when things aren't done. I mean, just the simplest little things. Somebody's paycheck is 5 cents off. The entire HR function gets blasted, right? They don't come
Yeah.
from the DEI people, they come from us. And
Right.
we're human too, right? So understanding that if you are in an organization and you feel like there's a lack of awareness for your specific area, ask for a meeting with your HR professional. If it's the HR business partner for your business unit, or your HR head, or wherever it is you think that lies, and bring the education with you. Say, hey, I represent X group and we have these concerns and we feel like HR could do this. Bring us some solutions. We don't have them all. But if you
Yeah.
want to have that conversation, I don't know of any color HR professional that will not sit down with you and listen. If you just, criticize us on the company intranet and that kind of stuff, then you've already kind of created a wall. But get on our calendars. I don't think that I know of I've ever worked with one that isn't willing to be educated on what our blind side may or may not be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I do think that um, the extra precaution to make sure that white cis women, even white cis men who are leading, kind of the people and the culture functions of organizations are keenly aware of what they don't know and how they need to lean into the educational aspects of getting proximate to understanding those lived experiences so that they don't fall into a trap of unintentionally operating from a lens that is not equitable, that is not indicative of really trying to create opportunities of success for all. And so I think that if nothing else, that question sparked us to be able to land at that really important, valuable point that I hope that is being heard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have just a few moments left, and I would love to give you an opportunity, Rhonda, to close us out in whatever way that feels appropriate for you. And so what did I not ask you about today that you're feeling a lot of energy around and you want to socialize to this community? Or again, just close us out in whatever way that feels appropriate to you.
I think probably the reason I reached out to you is this article that I read that said even in 2023, 47% of workers in the US and Canada, and I think it was Culture AMP, that put this out there, are not comfortable raising claims or reaching out to HR when they feel discriminated against, harassed, or what have
Right.
you. And, having been someone who was born in 1964 when the Civil Rights Act was signed, it just troubles me that we are no further than almost half of the people in the workplace. And
Mhm.
in HR, where we see how we have these major performance metrics. Did so-and-so make this many sales this month? Did so-and-so file the reports on time? Did whatever the jobs is and the measures that we have in terms of performance. I really want to encourage all of my colleagues in HR and DEI to work together to get down to the root of the fact that some people may be missing the mark on those annual performance or mid-performance because they are carrying around this emotional tax of not being able to be who they are fully in the workplace.
Absolutely.
Or they have come under discriminatory jokes at the water cooler, or, it's just feeling that their manager, I had a manager one time that walked in every day and fist bumped me. And I just finally was like, I'm Black, but could you relate to me as a professional? I was in HR, most of the people in my community, we just don't walk around fist bumping people all the time. But that's how he thought he should relate to me. And when we had the conversation, it was with another person present, and she got the same treatment, and she was offended because she was younger, and she thought he wasn't respecting her because she was younger. I
Mhm.
thought he thought it was a Black thing. He just, he was oblivious to the fact that he was bothering either one of us. So
Yeah.
once we got that out of the way, we had a much better relationship. And so I say that to say that if you have any of that weight on you, that we have spaces and we have tools in place that you should step up or what have you. And that I don't know of a company our size, smaller or or larger, that doesn't have a no retaliation policy that we really, really dive deep in on. And more
Mhm.
so now than we did 10 or 15 years ago. So, we need to open the door a little wider, make space for people to step up, make it safe for them to step up. And I think
Mhm.
that on the other side, I'm hoping that people who may hear this will pass the word that a little bit of courage goes a long way, but you don't have to suffer in silence in your organizations.
Yeah, you do not have to suffer in silence in your organizations. Certainly easier said than done for some people, but I think just socializing it and making people aware that that is an option, that is a response, right? Is important. So thank you so much, Rhonda, for being here today. We appreciate your insight. We appreciate you sharing and wishing this entire podcast community a great and safe weekend. And don't forget that tomorrow is Women's Equality Day. I often like to share that we are taking testimonials. And so if you're part of this podcast community and something has been said today or this experience has been worthwhile for you, we invite you to click on the link that's been placed into the chat or into the comments. If you're joining by LinkedIn Live, let us know what your experience has been. We'd love to be able to share that out as we continue to grow this community. Thank you all so very much. Bye-bye.